Ladies and gentlemen, children of the interwebs out there, Sebastian Envy, Strong Style, one after the reigning defending NPX Tag Team Champions, of course, Stargirl. Let us geek about it for a scant few minutes. Trying to get caught up. I feel like I'm perpetually trying to get caught up with stuff, but life is just being what it is. Trying out some new gear, having some pitfalls and frustrations with that, kind of trying to get a new workflow going. Hopefully it'll be beneficial in the long run, and then we'll get rid of these hiccups. But as I always say, it remains to be seen. Maybe I'll put that on a t-shirt, remains to be seen, because that's what I always say. Anyway, Stargirl, let's geek about it for a scant few minutes, because some good stuff in this episode. I mean, Stargirl continues to be the best superhero show going today for multiple reasons. And again, this episode wasn't heavy on action. There was a little bit towards the end, an encounter with the Shade. But there's just some emotional layers to this and some parallels, certain situations, like we open up with a flashback to Johnny, who previously was the owner of the Thunderbolt, and Pat, Talkie Pat, when Pat was Stripesy, and kind of just talking over the fact that they're sidekicks and just the idea of getting benched and kind of how that feels. And even though Pat kind of puts on this positive face, has this positive spin to it, you know, he feels some type of way about being benched like Johnny does. Next, you know, the ISA's together, Wildcat, which is cool to see Wildcat, because I love Wildcat. He comes down to get Johnny because they've got Solomon Grundy, so they need someone to match, you know, his power, I imagine. And Stripesy still gets benched, and then they do this great shot with like Pat sitting there just alone, and as he's working on the car, and then they kind of pan over to where the Stripesy shirt's in the case. Love that shot. Cinematography on the show is great. I mean, it is. But that parallel kind of shows up with Mike and his story, and the fact that he's alone, and we find out how alone he is. I mean, we kind of see it is because we see him on his paper route. There's some bullies he has to deal with. He comes home, he's looking wrecked, and nobody even notices. They're busy talking about the Shade and kind of what they're going to do with him, and Courtney's just, you know, on as, you know, BA would say about Hannibal back in the A-Team back in the day, you know, he's on the Jazz. That's what Courtney is. She's on the Jazz, on her Stargirl Jazz. Nobody notices Mike, and he goes up in the room. He gets harassed by his boss, has to write an address down. We know that Courtney took the pen last season, doesn't know that, you know, what it is, and Mike uses it, ends up summoning the Thunderbolt, and thinks that that's his key into the JSA, because that's what he wants to be in. After some mishaps, of course, it's magic. There's going to be some gags and some mishaps. He understands he has to be really specific with his wishes and certain other rules that go along with being a master of the Thunderbolt. The other guys soon find out about it, and he wants to be in the JSA. He just wants to belong and be a part of it. The thing about blended families, mixing families, where you have kids from a previous marriages, previous relationships, and you have to come together and be this blended family. There's bound to be some ups and downs and some feelings getting hurt as your blood, your biological kid, may feel some type of way about you and you bonding with the step kid or the step sibling and that sort of thing. We saw some of that last season with Mike and Court, and there was some friction there before they kind of settled out. Even though, I mean, that was one kind of disagreement, one incident that they had. That's going to be like the rest of their lives as their parents are together. That's always going to be a thing, and it's always kind of tricky to navigate. And you see that Pat kind of realizes throughout this episode, because the Thunderbolt tells Pat that he picked Mike because Mike feels so alone. Like, Mike is like the Thunderbolt, feels alone. Thunderbolt feels alone because Johnny got killed. And Johnny's last wish was for him to find a new friend. So Pat realizes he's not exactly doing right by Mike. So we get these, like, just the emotional, like, growth and the actual reality of the situation. Just, this is real stuff that happens. This is real stuff that people deal with, and yet we're getting it in such a layered, nuanced way in the superhero show. That's what makes this show just so, the writing on the show is so good, because it feels real. You can feel in those situations. Later on in the episode, Beth is talking to Rick about how her parents are going to get divorced. Rick is like, you should talk to them. You know, I'd talk to my parents if I could. That one little, like, line kind of shapes things for Beth in that exchange, but it's reveals something about Beth in that conversation, it reveals something about Rick. It's just stuff like that where they just little things, but they do it so well. We get the kids interacting with Shade because after some work as a team, they figure out a super specific wish so it doesn't get screwed up. To find the Shade, Shade's hanging out at the Wizard's old house, which has now been determined, has been designated a historical landmark or something of the sort. They go in and they want to know, like, what is he doing there? Mike, meanwhile, gets sidelined, gets benched, and you can see, like Pat, feels some type of way about getting benched, wants to get in on the action. But they go talk to the Shade. Shade says that he wasn't exactly friends with the ISA. Their interest aligned for a time. Then they didn't, so he dipped out. Said that Jordan was, basically off his rocker, and people who want to save the world are kind of that way. He has a different agenda. What his agenda is, we don't know, because we see him at a point in the episode going to look for the Black Diamond, which has Eclipso, which of course Cindy has. So what is his design with it? He tells them to stay out of their way. Mike shows up, tries to help out with the Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt gets, his butt kicked by the Shade. Shade uses his powers on the kids, tells them to stay out of his way, and then vanishes. And then we see by the end of the episode, he has the box that he took and says that Eclipso is going to kill the kids. Now, is he talking about the JSA, the junior JSA specifically, or is he talking about just all the kids in the town? Does he have that kind of agenda? We don't know Eclipso's exact agenda. We also don't know the Shade's agenda, and I like that. I like there's some layers and some mystery to the guy. I love his confidence and his arrogance and just the uber-like threat that he is. I'm kind of wondering because get a little bit kind of into dangerous territory though with his power set, because he can just sit there, just wield the shadows and throw the kids all around and stuff like that. So it's kind of like Damien Dark being on Arrow. It's a terrible choice because he's got mystic dude, magical powers, and he was shown many times to be able to just kind of force throw and force choke and all that kind of stuff. And yet, it's like, why didn't he ever just, like, as soon as the arrow shows up, all he has to do is just like, and that, snap his neck. Why didn't he ever do that? Because the plot needed to go along, the story needed to go along. So it's like stuff like that where you have these characters that have these powers that aren't wielded in just a simple, direct, smart way because it needs to keep the plot going along. Now, is that going to be true with the Shade? What are they going to use to counter him? I imagine Jade will come back and they'll use the Green Lantern powers against him. But in the meantime, what shot do they have against this guy? And of course, that's good by the writers. On the one hand, to kind of set these stakes, because it's like, what shot do these kids have to stop him? On the other hand, is he a little bit too overpowered for the situation for these kids? It remains to be seen how they kind of carry it out. But I am curious to kind of see, like I said, Shade said of Eclipso, he's going to kill the kids. He's talking about the town. Does maybe Eclipso or Shade have a vested interest in a kid in particular, or some kids in particular? Does he care about them at all? Is this just a plot to do something else? It remains to be seen. Is he a villain? Is he kind of kind of threading that line between hero and villain? Maybe the ends justify the means, so he has to kind of walk that, kind of straddle the line, or maybe even descent, like kind of cross over into the good side to whatever end his grand scheme, his grand plan is in Blue Valley. We don't know what it is. I'm insanely curious kind of see and how it intermixes with Eclipso, which is again a huge magical threat. So it remains to be seen. All in all, this was just a great episode. It was great to get some background on Mike. Mike, who in the end wishes the pen away, and then it goes to Jakeem, who of course is in the same situation as Mike. He feels alone. He thinks of himself as a loser. He's a loner. So he's kind of like fit. He's in a situation that's fit for him to make a friend with the Thunderbolt. So we'll see how that plays out as things go along. But all in all, it was just a great episode. Writing continues to be great. You don't need knockdown, drag-out action scenes in every episode because you just get just good character stuff. And then a smattering of action, which maybe it's just to kind of lay off the budget a little bit till the back half of the season when we actually get some, great stuff going. I'm fine with that because the writing is great. The characters I love all these characters. They're real. They react in realistic ways to these situations that they're in. Situations feel realistic, like I said, with dealing with Yolanda and her guilt over killing Brainwave, and you gotta kind of wonder, but there's a situation, there's some dialogue in the classroom where they're talking to Yolanda and Court are talking about it, and the Fiddler's kid kind of like does that. The Fiddler's kid hear it, gotta wonder, and kind of wonder how that's gonna play into Cindy's ISA that she's gonna be gathering. But they feel like real, three-dimensional, fully formed characters, and I like that. Love that about this show. Again, kudos to the writers. This, to me, is the best superhero show going on multiple levels. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys out there think? Let me know in the comments below. Follow me, social media. Talk to me there. Talk to me here. Until next time, because we got a new episode here in a few hours. Let us geek.